Hi everyone, welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese, and I'm back with another solo podcast today. Very excited to get into it. The Vikings are 4-0 now. When I went on vacation, they were 3-0 with two tough opponents in the Houston Texans and the Green Bay Packers, and they turned around 4-0. Obviously, coming off of the Packers game, I haven't gotten into the tape on the Texans game since I was kind of out of town, but coming off the Packers game, exciting win to get a win against your division rival with their starting quarterback in Jordan Love, playing for the game. Obviously, if it had been Malik Willis, it still feels good to get a win against the Packers, but it's not as validating. It's when you do it against Jordan Love, right? I didn't get to watch the game live, but I've gone through the tape, so I have my takeaways for that for you here. Obviously, a 31-29 victory, kind of a backdoor cover for the Packers. They never had the ball with an opportunity to actually take the lead after the Vikings, second drive, right? So the Packers had one drive where they were down 7-0, and then the next drive they were down 14-0, and they never got closer than 9 points away when they got the ball back, right? Obviously, they scored a touchdown to go within 2 at the end of the game, but they failed the onside kick. So, there's been a lot of consternation and talk about Vikings almost gave it away. I saw talk immediately after the game about how it was kind of like a moral defeat. I don't really view it that way. Granted, I wasn't watching the game live, right? So it's kind of a different feel when you're watching it live than when you're just going back and kind of watching the tapes. So, that's not really for me to say all that much either way, but at the end of the day, it's kind of a backdoor one-score game, kind of a backdoor cover, right, for the Packers in this game. But let's flip it over and dive right into kind of what my biggest takeaways from the game, right? So we'll start on the offensive side of the ball. I think, the Vikings go up 28-0 in this game. Pretty impressive offensive performance, score touchdowns on 4 of their first 5 drives. One of those was on a pretty shortened field after they got a turnover, but hey, you absolutely take that, and they scored a touchdown on that one, so that's about as good as you can ask for, right? The Packers got a couple short fields too, so it's not like they were unique in that. On the first drive, and kind of early in the game, the Packers, I thought, were really focusing in on Justin Jefferson in the passing game. That's pretty obvious, and I'll go over a couple plays in a second here, but it really freed up other receivers. You had a big catch by Jalen Nailor, and the touchdown, obviously, by Jordan Addison. And that's kind of why Justin Jefferson really didn't get a ton of production in the first half, and most of his production waited, besides the touchdown, until the second half, when the Packers decided they probably needed to start doing something different and stop focusing their coverage on Justin Jefferson. So let me talk about kind of what they did to focus their coverage on Justin Jefferson. The first one that comes to mind is the big 31-yard pass to Jalen Nailor on third down. And I believe it was third and long. It was like 3rd and 14. He was up against Eric Stokes, and the Packers were running man coverage. They were just running cover 1 man, pretty standard coverage. They were rushing 4, no blitzers or anything. So I guess they were just kind of hoping that their overload front kind of on the pass rush would get home, or that they could just hold up in man coverage one-on-one. The Vikings had a great concept to beat that. It was 2 deep crossers with, I believe, also a post route or a deep route by Jordan Addison, right? So the 2 deep crossers against cover 1, the way it's taught is so you have a deep safety and you have a hole player in the middle of the field for the defense, right? And that whole player usually is there to help with any crossing routes that come across the formation. So if a corner, especially a corner who's kind of on outside leverage on a receiver, has a receiver who breaks inside, he yells cut, 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 or something like that. There might be a different word for it. It just kind of depends on the team. And the whole player is supposed to help run with that receiver, right? They'll sometimes try to peel off, sometimes try to continue to run with the receiver depending on the rules. In this case, the Packers tried to run, but when you have 2 players, it puts that whole player in conflict and he has to choose, right? The Packers, for obvious reasons, chose to run with Justin Jefferson. The problem was that left Stokes one-on-one with Jalen Nailor, and Nailor absolutely roasted him. So Nailor ran a pretty good route on this, but really I thought what helped him was kind of the route split that he had, right? So he was kind of close to the line of scrimmage. and that means that a cornerback will play with what's called outside leverage on the receiver. So Stokes was lined up outside Jalen Nailor's outside shoulder, right? That's kind of where he was standing. It makes it really easy to run an in-breaking route. And I posted a clip to Twitter, right, where Nailor just absolutely runs away from him. I don't think Stokes plays the route very well, to be honest with you, but Nailor got wide open on this play, gets hit. Sam Darnold hits him with the pass. He's wide open, probably 14, 15 yards down the field. He's able to run, for a 31-yard gain, get the Vikings in scoring position pretty much immediately on their first drive of the game. Really nice play by Nailor. The design element uses Justin Jefferson to pull coverage away, and it also pulled the design. There was a deep post or something to Addison that pulled the deep safety away, right? You had the corner who was covering Addison, obviously run with him deep, and also the deep safety occupied by that deep route. So you have both of the zone players that kind of help players who are supposed to help double receivers occupied. You get the one-on-one matchup, and you win that one-on-one matchup. Good play. Great pocket by the offensive line, too. The very next play, the touchdown to Jordan Addison. I'm not really sure exactly what coverage the Packers were in on this play. It looks like it's cover 3. And if it's cover 3, I think it's a really interesting decision from the Packers defense in this case, because they leave the corner, I believe it was Corey Ballantyne, in outside cover 3 on Jordan Addison, completely susceptible to any in-breaking route with no safety help over the top, because they're so afraid of Justin Jefferson that the safety is on the hash that Justin Jefferson is on. And that's the far side of the field, right? So this safety, the deep safety, is all the way over Justin Jefferson, has no chance to get back to the post route from Addison off of a double move on the other side. Right, they did have Xavier McKinney as the other safety, but he comes down immediately at the snap, which indicates to me that it's cover 3. Cover 3 is just the Vikings post is a really good answer against that kind of cover 3, especially if you're actually going to have the post safety cheat over to Justin Jefferson. I don't like that kind of as an idea, because you leave your corner really exposed to the inside, and that's what Jordan Addison's great at, right? Running posts. I mean, how many long, massive touchdowns that we've seen by Jordan Addison on post routes alone? So I think great plan by the Vikings to attack that. I wasn't really a fan of the way the Packers ran the play on defense on that one, but obviously Jordan Addison wide open touchdown, very exciting for the Vikings. So Justin Jefferson, focus on him, definitely hurt the Packers early on. Something on the Viking side that I thought was really good throughout the game, but particularly in the entire first half, was the pass protection. I wrote an article on the offensive line for Zone Coverage. You can go over there and check it out. But I was really astounded with how clean the Vikings were keeping Sam Darnold. I think if you look at some pass protection metrics, right, like if you look at pressures given up by PFF or Next Gen Stats, which is available on NFL Pro, I grabbed NFL Pro. It's actually phenomenal for watching tape and also for just pulling up random statistics about players. Like, you're able to pull up, any play that Sam Darnold was under pressure in this game, for example. I was able to do that, watch all 11 of the plays. I kind of watched the tape in order as one run through. But then if I have other questions, like it's so easy to pull stuff up, and it's obviously this podcast isn't sponsored by anybody. That's not a paid advertisement. I just think it's actually a phenomenal value product. Like, the NFL had NFL Game Pass, which was great. The tape player was great. It worked out really well, and then they ruined it over a succession of years to where it was basically unusable. You're not supposed to, but I was able to download videos all the time previously, and it just continually made the functionality worse and worse and worse, to the point where I stopped buying NFL Game Pass, or whatever they called it eventually. I think they eventually called it NFL Pro. This NFL Pro Plus has brought me back to buying it, because I think it's that good of a product. So really kudos to them for doing it. But flipping back to the pass protection, I think they let up like 10 pressures by the NGS stuff, 11 pressures by PFF. Really, if you go back and watch those plays, like, I didn't clock them as having that many pressures left up. I wasn't counting or anything, but just in my watch through of the game and going back and watching some of those, I don't really think many of those are on the offensive line. Like, there are definitely a handful of plays where they got beat. The one sack by Quay Walker is one where the offensive line screwed up. The other strip sack I put on Sam Darnold, right? And there were a couple other plays where I think Sam Darnold kind of walked into pressure. There was a pocket, and Sam Darnold maybe had to move, but the offensive line did a good enough job to enable him to do that, where the pressure, even if they got pushed around a little bit, wasn't a significant factor to me. So, you saw clean pockets all game for Sam Darnold. It's notable because the Vikings were going up against Kenny Clark, who's somebody who has terrorized them in the past, right? Rashawn Gary is also a pretty good player. Brian O'Neill and Christian Darrisaw just put him on ice all game. He really had no tangible impact in the game to me. So really love that from the offensive line. Also thought they were pretty high quality run blocking. It wasn't as good of a running game as maybe some of the others that the Vikings have had, but there were a couple of really, really nice holes and really nice runs where Aaron Jones was able to get 10 plus yards. But where I thought they really shone was in the screen game. Particularly Ed Ingram and Garrett Bradbury getting downfield and releasing downfield for screens. The Vikings ran 4 screens in this game. And when I say 4 screens, they technically ran 5. One was a third down play where it's just kind of like the check down option is the screen. It was like 3rd and 25. They gained 14 yards, right? So the other 4 screens were true traditional screens. They weren't wide receiver screens on the edge where you're throwing the ball quick to a wide receiver and you have the wide receivers blocking in front. They were the running back mostly, or in one case it was Josh Oliver, the tight end, releases out of the backfield, and you also have a couple offensive linemen releasing to block in front of them, right? And those 4 screens went for 40 yards. 2 of them were first downs. Aaron Jones got 12 yards on 2 of them, and then Ty Chandler got 8 yards on 1 and brought up a 2nd and 2. And I forget what the situation for the Josh Oliver one was, but he also got 8 yards, and it was also a nice gain, right? So really, it was also a positive play, I should say, right? So really good execution on all of those screens. You see Bradbury hitting his target downfield, blocking the defender that he's supposed to block. You see Ed Ingram blocking the defender that he's supposed to block, getting good push. I would say there was one where Ingram, I think, was a little slower to get downfield than he really should have been. It was a second screen to Aaron Jones. He probably could have scored if Ingram had been more aggressive towards the safety, but he kind of slowed it down trying to make sure he was getting a block on him, and it kind of mixed up Aaron Jones a little bit. But on that play, Ingram honestly probably wasn't even expecting to block that player at all. It was just that both linebackers blitzed, so he really didn't have a target until a guy who was 15 plus yards downfield, which is probably a little bit confusing for an offensive lineman in that scenario, so I can see where he got kind of mixed up in that. But with that being said, Garrett Bradbury was out in front, hitting their targets on screens. That's critical for an offensive lineman. It's actually not that easy to do. You have to get out there and hit somebody who's much smaller and quicker than you and actually block them when they're trying to get around you, right? They don't want to be blocked by you because you're bigger than them and stronger than them, right? They're trying to get around you. So it's not as easy as it might sound. So I wanted to shout out the offensive line across the board. I mean, I think the tackles nearly pitched a shutout. There were a couple misses. Blake Brandel, I thought, was responsible on a couple stunts that got pressure for the Packers. Those were the only real ones that I had a major concern with. There was one where a hand flashed in Sam Darnold's face. There was the second scramble I thought was worse pass protection than the first scramble, but I'll get into that scramble a little bit. So on the scramble in the first half, it was a 9-yard scramble for Sam Darnold. It got charted as a pressure. I don't really see it as pressure. The edge rushers get completely pushed back to past the pocket. They get pushed back to 14 yards or something like that. Sam Darnold has a decent amount of room to step up. It's not a great amount of room to step up, and that's why it got charted as a pressure. Brandel and Bradbury got pushed back a little bit, but Brandel in particular had the defensive tackle, who I believe was Darryl Slayton, kind of cross his face. But Sam Darnold, because Darrisaw had done a great job of pushing the edge rusher past the pocket, Darnold had a huge lane to step up to his left, and Brandel actually finished the rep, I thought, really nicely by pancaking the defensive tackle that it was blocking, right? So there was a little bit of pressure. It caused Darnold to scramble. I honestly thought Darnold could have released the ball as soon as he hit the top of his drop. I thought Josh Oliver was open on the play. I also thought that there was a comeback route to Addison over the middle, that the pressure may have mitigated a little bit. It may have eliminated a little bit for Darnold, and that's when he just decided to run. But he had more than enough room. I believe this was a 3rd and 1 play to get the first down with his legs. So end of the day, no harm, no foul. There was nobody who ever really laid a hand on Darnold. He was able to have a wide open path to scramble and get the first down. So I don't really see it that much as a negative. And then if I go into the sack, right, the strip sack, the first sack by Quay Walker, let me go to that one first, actually. So that was a stunt very similar to the one the Vikings ran in the 49ers game that got Blake Cashman a sack, where you have the linebacker attack the offensive lineman to his outside shoulder. You have a linebacker mugged up, and he attacks the offensive lineman to the outside shoulder and then runs to hit the quarterback. In this case, the Packers had a double A-gap mug, which, if you remember from the Zimmer years, right, the way offenses need to protect that is usually they put the center takes one guy and the running back takes the other guy. And what the defense will typically do is have the way the center turns, have that guy drop back, and the guy who's getting blocked by the running back blitz, right? Because you want a smaller player, you want to attack the smaller player. It also makes it a lot harder for the offense to pick up stunts in that case, which the Packers end up running here, because to pick up a stunt, and I've learned this, JT O'Sullivan does a great job at the QB School. It's a YouTube channel. It's his YouTube channel that he runs. He's put out a video on like every Sam Darnold game, so I highly recommend you check that out because he just does phenomenal content. But it's difficult to pick up stunts when the blockers aren't on the same level, is what he typically says, right? So that means that you have to be, if you're on like the left tackle and left guard should both be on the 28-yard line if they're trying to pick up a stunt. If one's on the 30-yard line and one's on the 27-yard line, they're not going to be able to do it because they just can't pass off the players. It's a lot harder to pick up a stunt when you've got a running back blocking because that running back starts significantly behind where the offensive lineman is, right? So Brandell isn't really expecting to kind of have to pick up a stunt in this case, and Jones tries to pass the stunt off. So he sees the linebacker attacking Brandell, Jones does, and Brandell isn't looking at the linebacker at all. So because of that, the linebacker Quay Walker hits Brandell on the shoulder. Brandell kind of gets knocked off of his footing a little bit. Nobody's there to pick him. Nobody's there to pick Walker up to the inside of Brandell, so he's able to run right at Darnold. Ideally, you'd either have it so Brandell kind of had his head on a swivel a little bit more and was able to see Quay Walker making that rush, or Jones would just keep with the blitzing linebacker, right, and continue to block him and hope that somebody else, in this case Garrett Bradbury, could pick up the looper. I think that's probably the correct answer because you want to have, because of the difficulty of picking up a stunt between a running back and an offensive lineman, right? Because where they start out in a position that makes that difficult, you probably want to have the answer not to have those two pass it off and hope that they don't rush somebody on Bradbury who has to slide to the right, and Bradbury is able to search with his eyes and come back and pick up the looper, which is exactly what he tries to do, and he helps Jones out. Bradbury and Jones end up blocking the looper, I believe it was Devontae Wyatt, and Quay Walker runs free, right, because he kind of knocked Brandell over a little bit. So, miscommunication there. There was another miscommunication between Darisaw and Brandell where Brandell just did not get back to the looper. It created a pressure. I believe that went incomplete. But, couple issues there. On the strip sack, I put that fully on Sam Darnold. So it's not a zero blitz by the Packers, but the Packers threaten basically 7 players along the line of scrimmage, I believe. And then the Vikings actually motion Josh Oliver over to the right side. So in this case, the Vikings have 6 players that they're able to block, and there are, I believe, 6 threats from the Packers on the line of scrimmage. So they should be able to take it out, but the problem is that the corner from the other side to the bunch is the one who actually blitzes, right? So he's a 7th threat. So you have these 6 guys covered, but if there's a 7th guy that's coming, you need to get the ball out quickly. Usually that requires some communication from the wide receiver to point it out, and Sam Darnold was looking the other direction. He was looking on the Josh Oliver side because he was expecting the blitz to come from the right, and he would have been hot given the fact that Oliver was running around, so he only had 5 pass protectors instead of 6, really. But since that never came, he kind of double clutched the ball a little bit and got hit from behind, strip sack as he was trying to throw the ball. Somebody needs to help alert Sam Darnold, or he just needs to be more aware of the blitz coming from the backside. And I also thought he could have just thrown the ball before he hitched. He held onto the ball for an extra beat, took an extra step before he prepared to throw, I believe, to Oliver, who was open on a quick out route. He was open initially. I thought Darnold should have thrown the ball quickly with a little bit more anticipation. He doesn't. He ends up getting strip sacked. I don't put that on the offensive line. The corner wasn't part of the protection plan. If you have a player who rushes who's not part of the protection plan, it's on the quarterback to figure that out and get the ball out before he gets sacked, because he's not going to get blocked. So, end of the day, overall, I thought it was a really good game for the offensive line. Obviously, a couple miscues led to sacks, but really I didn't even put them too much on the offensive line. So banner day for them. Go check out my article if you want to see more videos of that over at zonecoverage.com. So went pretty deep into the offensive line, including a bunch of stuff that happened in the second quarter, but I'm going to flip it back to the Jordan Addison touchdown run, which I just thought was a nifty piece of running by Addison. I believe before that play, the Vikings on their zone run plays run a ton of jet sweep action, right? It's something, I mean, you see all the time, right? Receivers motioning across the formation just before the snap, and the Vikings might fake a handoff before they hand it off to a running back. They'd only actually run one jet sweep before that Addison touchdown, and it was in the Texans game. It was the Naylor 4th and 1 conversion, I believe. Right, so they're faking it a lot, but they don't actually run it. It's because they're saving it for kind of more opportune options, right, where they really think they have the defense out leveraged and it'll hit, and that's exactly what happened on the Addison TD run. I thought there was pretty good blocking, but ultimately I thought Jordan Addison made the play, right? So he was one-on-one with a defender who ended up unblocked, jukes him out of his shoes, and is able to accelerate past, I think it's Garrett chasing him or something for the touchdown. Justin Jefferson also lays a great block on the play, right? I think he got a shout out from Josh McCown. I saw a video or something where Josh McCown was talking about how Jefferson, got a great block that sprung Addison for the TD and then got a TD on the very next drive, right? Just kind of showing how hard work pays off. But obviously phenomenal that your $35 million a year receiver is willing to do the dirty work and make that block, but really a great play by Addison in general. The last thing I wanted to talk about, just from maybe an individual play perspective or, a kind of a one-off perspective, was the phenomenal Justin Jefferson touchdown catch, right? I've seen people describe it as like just phasing through the defensive back, Keyshawn Nixon. And I actually think there was a lot of skill on Jefferson's part for making this play, right? So the Packers are in man coverage. Sam Darnold knows he has a one-on-one with Jefferson. You're never going to begrudge Sam Darnold for throwing the ball one-on-one to Justin Jefferson in man coverage in any scenario. I literally don't care if it's a goal line fade. It just try to get the ball in that guy's hands. Like, even if a goal line fades are like the least efficient play in football, I don't care. You're throwing the ball to your guy in Justin Jefferson. You want to do it. And in this case, it ends up in a touchdown because I think of Justin Jefferson's skill. So if you watch the play, you can see Justin Jefferson turn his head around and try to locate the football early, but he doesn't move his hands. That's critical to me because it prevents Nixon from kind of knowing where the ball is, and he has to search for the ball. So if Justin Jefferson were to try to put his hands up behind him, Nixon knows the ball's coming behind him in a back shoulder fade as opposed to going in front of him. The way Jefferson acts, and I think this was mostly trying to keep his balance after making a break on the route, but he almost is running as if the ball is going to go deep, even though he has his head back. So you can see Nixon turn his head around a couple different directions and try to flail with his arms because he has no idea where the ball is. Jefferson, who got his head around, can see the ball, but he's not really giving away when the ball is going to arrive. There was a corner talking about, it might have been like Dante Hall or somebody, right? But I can't remember exactly who it was, who was talking about they could tell when the ball was coming because they would see receivers' eyes widen, and that told them to be able to get their hands up. What that corner also said was that Randy Moss was a guy who his eyes never got wider when the ball was coming his way. So he'd look back to the football, but you weren't sure whether or not the ball was coming there. if I had to bet, I bet Justin Jefferson has that exact same skill where you can't really tell where the ball's coming and his eyes don't widen like most receivers do if you're a cornerback trying to watch him for tells on whether or not the ball's coming, which is what you have to do as a corner in man coverage. So Jefferson really almost never gets his arms up in this case. And I think that was the critical piece that prevented this from becoming a pass breakup, because the ball hits him in his chest, he has his arms pretty much tight to him, and he's able to haul it in. And Nixon's flailing around trying to make the play on the ball. I think that Nixon, tried to do all he could to figure out where the ball was, but Justin Jefferson didn't give away a tell that allowed him to do that. And that's what allowed Jefferson to be so successful in the play. So I absolutely love that. Phenomenal. Obviously, Justin Jefferson's the best receiver in the game. I don't know what more I can say on that. So if we flip it over to Sam Darnold, who I want to talk about a little bit, I thought this was probably Sam Darnold's worst game, and I haven't gone back and watched the full tape on the Texans, but just from what I remember of the Texans games and the other two games, I thought he played probably his worst game of the season. Obviously, he tried to throw the 2 picks. I thought he was late on a number of throws in a way that he wasn't in the previous weeks. There were a couple nice anticipation throws, including one to Addison pretty early on, I think. And, the touchdown might be an anticipation throw. There was an in-breaking route that's probably an anticipation throw. But really, I saw him double clutching the ball a lot. And I did put out a post on Twitter where I thought he was doing it in some respects, and I do think this is true in some respects, to try to bait hands from defensive linemen. So Sam Darnold has not had a ball batted by a defensive lineman this year, and I think part of it is he has shown the ability to find throwing windows that are away from where defensive linemen put their hand up, right? On quick game, defensive linemen have a feel for when you're going to throw the ball, and they try to get their hands up when they can see they're not getting the passer. Sam Darnold will do a little fake, try to bait the hands, and then throw the ball. He did that a number of times in this game, but I think to some respect it was to his detriment. I mentioned the strip sack, which I kind of already went through. There was another throw over the middle to Brandon Powell on a slant where it was late. It was kind of the hospital ball that got Brandon Powell injured that then precipitated to Jalen Nailor muffing the punt, right? That ball I thought was late. There were a couple other instances where I thought he could have gotten the ball out quicker and it ended up becoming an incompletion, or maybe not being as maximum of a gain as it could be, right? So I think that might be emerging as a little bit of an issue. It's something I'll want to keep an eye out for in future games. If he continues to double clutch like that, it might turn into a negative. Now, on the flip side, I thought Darnold using his legs as a check down was extremely positive. I kind of went through the first scramble that he had, but I thought the second scramble was more impressive. The second scramble where he was able to get out of pressure, it's just great to have a quarterback who kind of has that capacity to use their legs as a check down. So that was nice to see. Obviously, you have all of the touchdown throws, right? 3 touchdown throws in the first 4 drives. That's nothing to sneeze at. He was able to enable his receivers in a lot of cases to get some big gains. You have the Jalen Nailor one. You had the Justin Jefferson 27-yard catch in the second half. You had a really nice throw to Jordan Addison that I believe converted a 3rd and long. So, multiple 3rd and long conversions. Like, I'm not trying to say he had a terrible game or anything, but I did think he put the ball in harm's way a little bit. I'm going to bring up the strip sack for like the 4th time that I kind of put on him. The first throw to Justin Jefferson where he was able to scramble out, but he put the ball immediately in danger and the linebacker couldn't catch it. The interception I thought was an over-aggressive decision by Darnold. I could see where he thought Aaron Jones had leverage on that play, but it's Aaron Jones who's a running back against a safety who was able to undercut the leverage that Jones had. I also thought he double clutched that one a little bit and probably could have thrown the ball a little bit further outside to help prevent McKinney from undercutting it. Obviously, it probably shouldn't have been an interception based on how McKinney bobbled the ball, but whatever, it was still a bad decision and not a great throw to put it in that area, right? So up and down game from Darnold. Still, even with the negatives, it didn't hurt the Vikings into a loss. Now, if Darnold suddenly has a game where he turns into a pumpkin and is doing that all game, it becomes a lot more of a concern. But I think taking the good with the bad so far, and there have been negatives, and those negatives have harmed the Vikings. They haven't harmed the Vikings all the way, right? There was still the play where, I don't know if Aaron Jones got screwed up or something, but Sam Darnold ended up just eating it because he laid down for -5 yards because Jones didn't go the way he expected after he tried to check into something. So I would say that's a positive as opposed to a couple weeks ago when Darnold tried to flip the ball to Jones anyway when Johnny Munt wasn't on the same page and did an illegal motion on the play, right? And the Vikings lost 13 yards on that play. Or, against the Texans where Darnold throws the ball backwards to Brandon Powell and Powell somehow picks it up, right? So the Vikings haven't been punished for a few of these mistakes, but they are getting punished for a lot of them. I don't think they've actually recovered one of their own fumbles, one of their own true fumbles, I'll say, right? So the Brandon Powell backwards pass counts as a fumble. There was also one, I believe it was Fred Warner knocked the ball out of Sam Darnold's hands when he was going out of bounds. That counted as a fumble. I'm pretty sure that got listed as a fumble recovery for Sam Darnold, which is ridiculous. But other than that, the Vikings haven't recovered any fumbles on offense, which is really annoying because they weren't recovering any fumbles on offense either last year. And you would think that the luck would regress eventually for that. It hasn't yet. But it kind of is what it is. That was a little bit of a tangent, but what I'm trying to say is Sam Darnold has been playing good football. He hasn't been playing elite football, in my opinion, right? There have been really high highs. There have also been some Sam Darnold-esque lows. So I think that you're getting currently honestly a high-quality starting quarterback, which is something I think is crazy, and I did not envision myself saying about Sam Darnold, who has some boneheaded moments, maybe like a Josh Allen light or something like that, right? And those boneheaded moments are not hurting the Vikings at this point because they've been so efficient on offense elsewhere. If you start to lose some of the high-level play from Darnold, it'll become a really big issue moving forward. I don't think that's going to happen. I honestly think that the level of play he's been putting has been pretty sustainable, which is why I feel really good about the Vikings team moving forward because Darnold's making the mistakes. Now, there may be a game or two, I'm not trying to say the Vikings are going to go 17-0 or anything. There's probably going to be a game or two where his mistakes end up doing them and costing them the game overall. But I also don't think there's going to become a string of games where Darnold doesn't play well enough for the Vikings to win. So I think the Vikings are in pretty good shape this season, especially to at least make the playoffs, if not, win the division over a really good division in both the Lions and the Packers. So overall, very happy with Sam Darnold's play. Thought this was his worst game, but think he's going to continue to play at a pretty good level moving forward, which is really impressive considering I really didn't think much of him at all coming into the season. Now I'm going to shift it over to Kevin O'Connell, who I think there's been some discussion point about his play calling after the game. And, first of all, I want to say that the design side for O'Connell is 1,000,000% still there. There was a ton of great stuff in this game. The Josh Oliver touchdown I thought was a neat wrinkle where he had Oliver bluff blocking before releasing out, and he got completely lost in the defense. The linebacker didn't, just kind of figured he was a blocker and didn't pick him up. He ends up pretty wide open for the touchdown, outrunning the linebacker that eventually figured out he had to cover him. I mentioned a big Jordan Addison third down conversion. I thought O'Connell was in his bag on third downs pretty much the whole time. There was one earlier in the game, I think, where Sam Darnold missed Brandon Powell on a corner. Powell got wide open. There was pre-snap motion. It was kind of the bunch into a 3-receiver stack, I think. And, he had Jefferson and Addison with him. Powell ends up open on the corner because attention goes to Jefferson and Addison. Darnold kind of just misses the throw. If I go back to the Addison big conversion, you had Justin Jefferson taking up a bunch of attention on that play. I believe it was Dagger. And, Addison just kind of comes open over the middle of the field, makes a really nice acrobatic catch on a throw that's a little bit high from Darnold. And then, the play that got Brandon Powell hurt that I talked about, I thought was good design from Kevin O'Connell, too. You had but Jefferson running an out route and Powell running slant. It's 3rd and 1, so the slant wins quick against man coverage, which is what the Packers are in. And Darnold was just late to see it. Like, Powell won with the first step. Darnold clutched the ball a couple times, held on to it, ended up throwing where the linebacker was in the window. It was a little bit behind Powell because Darnold threw it a little bit late, so he tried to protect Powell a little bit. Powell still ended up getting blown up big. I thought Darnold could have held onto the ball, and he had the pocket protection to be able to throw the ball on the out route to Justin Jefferson. I understand throwing the slant to Powell is the first read, but since he was late on the read, he needs to come off of it and go to the Jefferson throw. So I have a really hard time complaining about the run-pass balance when I think a lot of these third downs should have been converted, and I think a lot of the pass plays for the Vikings should have been successful with better execution. That's just me. Obviously, I've mentioned it a few times, but I wasn't watching the game live, so I didn't get the feel of the game, and I knew the end result, so I didn't really get the feel of the game slipping away like live when I was watching it that people had. So like maybe my viewpoint there is a little bit too clinical, right? Because when you're in the flow of the game, I think the feel is a little bit different, and maybe he should have run the ball a little bit more. But from my perspective, I didn't see it as too much of a problem. They were getting good looks to pass. They had open receivers. They just weren't executing to the level that they needed to in the second half. Other comment I wanted to make, because people talked about the run game, and Luke Braun has brought up that he thought they should have run a lot more duo on his podcast, Locked On Vikings. I just want to point out, I only charted 6 duo runs on 27 total designed runs for the Vikings. Obviously, there's a couple jet sweeps and some random stuff in there, but there was a lot less duo. Apparently, Kevin O'Connell in his post-game press conference said they didn't really love a lot of the run looks because the Packers were playing single high, which is what they do as a defense. So, I do understand it to an extent, but it is something that the Vikings have run very well this game, and I honestly expect them to run a lot against the Jets. I'll get into that a little bit in terms of running duo, but I think they just didn't love what they were seeing this time, so they didn't run it as much. And it kind of ties into the run-pass balance a little bit, right? Like, I don't really have a problem with the way the Vikings were calling those plays, because I thought the plays that they were calling attacked the defense that they were getting very well. But at the end of the day, my viewing was removed from the flow of the game. So I don't know if that's a fully complete analysis there, right? So if we flip it over the defensive side of the ball, there's, I think, a lot of consternation in Vikings land just based on how the Packers are reacting to this football game, or Packers fans are reacting to this football game in terms of Jordan Love's play, which I didn't think was very good, but I think Packers fans are thinking was pretty good, and I think Packers fans kind of think they deserve to win this game, and maybe some Vikings game. I think the moods kind of flipped a little bit, but immediately after the game thought the Vikings deserved to lose the game, so I feel like those post-game feelings have kind of moved away and more warm towards the Vikings since the game has happened. But regardless, the Packers had minus .111 EPA per play on the day, right? So that's terrible in terms of an offense. It was 22nd in the NFL in the week. That's per rbsdm.com. They were minus .104 on the passing side of things, so really bad passing offense in the game just from an EPA perspective. And I think watching the tape, I wasn't all that impressed with what the Packers were able to do. Obviously, they came up with something like 390 yards of passing. Jordan Love, before a final drive where he would have required an onside kick to be able to try it, was 28 of 50 for 299 yards with 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. That's less than 6 yards per attempt. 7 yards per attempt is about NFL average. If you get under 6 yards per attempt for a full season, you're one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. Like, that was Bryce Young last year. Territory was something like 5.8 yards per attempt. So that total numbers does not impress me. And the rest of his yardage came on a meaningless drive, right? He went 4 for 4 for 90 yards or something on that final drive with the touchdown. So really just not an impressive day for me for Love. I mean, I thought there was some good stuff from the Packers, and I thought, Matt LaFleur does a good job designing an offense, but I didn't think the Packers executed very well on offense. If I go onto him a little bit, I thought the Vikings, especially in the first half, did a really good job of forcing Jordan Love off of his first read. Like, you would see him drop back and snap his head very quickly, trying to throw a quick game throw, and that would be covered immediately. And then he'd have to come back to something else. And a couple times, honestly, I thought he did a pretty good job coming back and progressing and kind of hitting that second target. But I just didn't think the consistency was there from an accuracy perspective. Like, so many balls went into the dirt. So many balls were high to receivers. So many balls were just difficult to catch or made the catch more difficult. Obviously, one of them precipitated into an interception that was kind of tipped up in the air a couple times, but the accuracy was very spotty to me for Love. From a Vikings defense perspective, they played a lot of quarters, which was the most I think I charted with them. I didn't run the full numbers yet, but they ran, I would say, mostly quarters in terms of coverage in this game, which is different from what they had been. Quarters is a little bit of a deeper coverage from the cover 3 and the Tampa 2 that they were running. Tampa 2 is also a pretty deep coverage, but there are just less underneath zone defenders. I do think that helped Love check down a bit, and that's what a lot of the second half was checkdowns that went for extra long gains. There was one Tucker Kraft, 26-yard gain. Check down, he, was third down and long. The Vikings weren't able to rally before the sticks. He broke a tackle from Byron Murphy. Just not a great play from the Vikings defense, but I think you'll take those over getting gashed deep, which I don't think the Vikings really got gashed deep all that much in this game. There were a couple plays where the Packers were able to attack, but they were kind of few and far between, and a lot of the downfield throws were nothing burgers. The Vikings, like I said, they were forcing him off his first read. I also thought that they got a lot of pressure in the first half and really weren't able to do that despite rushing, 5 or more in the second half. That Tucker Kraft catch that went for 26 yards on the check down was one where the Vikings sent 5, so they only have 6 players in coverage, and because they're running quarters, they only have 2 underneath defenders. It's third down, they get pushed out towards the 6, but are more towards the middle of the field, so a throw to the flat is hard to rally to. If you have 3 underneath defenders on quarters without a blitz, it's easier to rally to. Now, I'm not saying the Vikings shouldn't run 6-man coverages as quarters. I think it's a great changeup and a very effective changeup because they also run 6-man coverages in cover 3 and Tampa 2. And it's really the key when you're blitzing is to confuse the quarterback for long enough that the blitz gets home. The part of that finishes the sentence, though, is the blitz needs to get home, right? So it's great to run a variety of coverages behind it, but you need to hit on the blitz, right? So the Vikings, prior to this game, I think had done a phenomenal job of regularly getting home on the blitz, and I think they did a great job of getting home and affecting Love on the blitz in the first half, right? They didn't get a ton of sacks, but I think they were causing him to just kind of chuck up balls into nowhere, and they were creating negative plays by getting pressure on Love in the blitz. In the second half, they got pressure on him, but he was able to escape and get the ball out to players more often. So there is a way to beat the Brian Flores defense, and it's to protect against the blitzes, which is not easy to do, and the Vikings have gotten a lot more dangerous, and have a quarterback able to escape the pocket, which Love was able to do in this game, and be able to punish you without also making massive mistakes, which Love did the third part and made massive mistakes in this game, right? So I don't think the Vikings defense was necessarily solved or anything per se. I do think there were a couple beaters that the Packers did with a well-designed offense that worked against the Vikings. Dagger was in use, and that was something the Vikings struggled a lot with last year. I thought that the first couple times the Packers ran Dagger, the Vikings weren't really prepared for it. There was a cover 3 rep where it worked really well, and that was off of play action where they pulled the linebackers up, right, and Josh Metellus is at a linebacker level, so I'll count him as a linebacker here. They occupy the deep safety with the vertical route, and the Vikings are in cover 3, so Byron Murphy has to try to cover, or no, I'm sorry, it was Mills, it wasn't Dagger, but it's a similar thought, right? Mills has a deep post and then a dig route underneath it. So the safety goes deep with the deep post, trying to protect against the deep ball. Byron Murphy's in cover 3. He can't get across to take the dagger route because it's real, or the dig route because it's really hard for a cover 3 corner to do that. What you need in that scenario is the linebacker level to get enough depth to deter the throw or knock the throw away by reading the quarterback. Because the linebackers were pulled up by the play action, they weren't able to do that. It's a good way to attack the defense, and there are ways to beat every coverage that you're able to run. But what I'm impressed with by the Vikings is the variety of coverages they've been able to run this year. They run a ton of cover 2, or Tampa 2 specifically, but a ton of cover 2, mix in man coverage, run a ton of quarters, run a ton of cover 3. They run it from all sorts of funky formations. I saw some wild ways that Brian Flores got to Tampa 2 and quarters specifically in this game. And we've talked, I probably gloss over it more than maybe I should because, the Vikings rotating their coverages has just become such a feature of what they do to me that it doesn't surprise me at all anymore when they're dropping out. There's some really good national media analysts, I've seen Mina Kimes do it, probably Nate Tice has done it a few times, who talk about, the Vikings get into cover 3 from dropping 2 safeties from the line of scrimmage or something like that, right? And when I see that, I just think, yeah, they do that all the time. It's kind of not a unique thing. I will say in this game, I thought Brian Flores had 2 really unique ways he got into different coverages. So Tampa 2, there was a play where the Packers were lined up in 3-by-1. I believe it was a 3rd down. And the Vikings showed a single deep safety with 3 corners over to the 3 receiver side. So that's pre-snap showing man coverage. When you rotate all 3 of your corners over to the 3 receiver side, you're pretty much giving an indicator that you're playing man coverage. They're not. In this case, Byron Murphy, who's on the number 3 receiver, was the pole runner, who's the Mike in cover 3. Shaq Griffin, I believe it was Shaq Griffin. It might have been Gilmore. It doesn't really matter. Was over the number 2. And he runs back to the deep half over his player, and Bynum, who I believe was the deep safety, goes over to the right and is the other half-field safety. I had never seen Brian Flores do something like that, taking into Tampa 2. It was a really inventive way for him to do it. The other one was a blitz mug where the Vikings are all on the line of scrimmage on the left-hand side. The Packers don't really have a lot on offense out there, but they're all there, so really looks like it's probably cover 3 pre-snap if they're going to drop out of it and not blitz. They do have a deep safety in, I believe it was Bynum, I can't remember offhand, but they do have a deep safety. However, 2 of the players from the side where the Vikings are showing blitz drop back into quarters. It was a crazy way to get to corners. I've never seen anything like that, and that one honestly should have been a completion. Stephon Gilmore played it a little bit far off, and it was a throw to the outside that Wicks kind of dropped, and Love kind of missed the throw pretty much entirely. So I believe that was a 3rd down in the 3rd or 4th quarter that ended up leading to a punt. But it was probably right out of halftime. But really a wild way to get into this coverage that I hadn't seen before. So I wanted to shout it out because I feel like I probably should have done a better job of shouting that out. It's really impressive, but honestly, watching the Vikings, you kind of get immune to it a little bit. Another interesting thing I thought from the Vikings is even though they blitzed a ton, they really didn't run any of their signature cover 0 look. I only got 2 reps of that, and the first rep, to give you an idea, was on the Byron Murphy interception, right? So that was the second to last drive of the game by the Packers before the Vikings actually ended up running cover 0, or maybe it was the 3rd to last drive, right? So kind of interesting there that despite how much they blitzed, I really didn't think the Vikings didn't run much cover 0. And going back to that, that throw to Murphy was a complete just chuck up a prayer by Jordan Love. And I thought he did that a ton in this game, which is why I really wasn't impressed with him, accumulating the yardage. There were a number of plays where I think he didn't understand what the coverage was because the Vikings were confusing him. He didn't know where to go to a receiver, or there wasn't a receiver open, and therefore he just kind of tried to throw the ball as far as he could. And there were so many plays where the Vikings had 2 defenders in the area, one of them knocked it down, right? Because there was a receiver there, but it got knocked down. There was a red zone play where he threw the ball up. It kind of went down harmlessly, but he was under pressure. It was one where Jonathan Gennard came free, unblocked, wasn't able to sack him. He just kind of chucked it up Like, I really think this could have been like a 5 or 6 interception day for Jordan Love if he got a little bit unluckier on a couple of those throws. And I really don't think he got all that unlucky on the 3 interceptions that he threw. The first one was great play by Kamu Grugier-Hill in Tampa 2, reading the route combination and undercutting a dig route, which, again, I talked about hurting the Vikings a little bit. They also punished the Packers by getting an interception, right? So I don't think it's going to be the consistent winner that it was at the end of last year against this Vikings defense, because they're able to mix up the coverage a lot more than they were last year, particularly with their usage of quarters. The second one was one where the Vikings, 2 plays in a row, and the Packers didn't have an answer for this on either play. It was kind of baffling to me because it's a pretty straightforward blitz. But the Vikings put 5 men on the line of scrimmage. It was their traditional 5 down front, right? So 3 interior defensive linemen, Van Ginkel and Grenard, I assume. I honestly didn't check who the other one was. But they drop they drop Van Ginkel into coverage into an underneath zone. And because of the 5 down linemen, the Packers shifted their line to the right? They slid to the right. And the Vikings just blitzed Blake Cashman into the slide. So as soon as he saw the guard go to the right, he blitzed, and the first one was the second interception where Jordan Love threw it high, right? Because the Packers didn't have a protection call to protect against Blake Cashman. They were sliding to the right, which is the other linebacker in that scenario they would be able to pick up if they blitz. So Jordan Love has to throw to his hot route, which was Luke Musgrave, on a quick hook route. Love throws the ball high because Cashman's leaping up in his face. The ball gets tipped up in the air. It gets tipped up to the receiver running the glance behind it. Shaq Griffin catches it, right? That's a bad throw forced by the blitz that ended up getting tipped up, became a dangerous pass, and became an interception. Maybe it wasn't a throw directly to a defender, but it's a bad throw that precipitated it into an interception because it wasn't a good throw. Then the next play, the very next play, the Vikings run the exact same blitz, and the Packers don't pick it up. Josh Jacobs had run a little kind of flat route on the first play, and then the next play, he's supposed to be there in protection to pick up Blake Cashman. He just doesn't make the block. It was a pretty rough block attempt by Jacobs. But end of the day, I think Love ended up scrambling out of that one and kind of throwing the ball away. But I think that was another play where he just kind of threw the ball up in the middle of nowhere, and it was still in play as opposed to actually being out of bounds. So it was kind of a dangerous play again for the Packers. So that's kind of what I went a little bit of a rambling discussion there, but overall how I thought Love played and how the Vikings kind of did in coverage against the Packers' design. I do want to give some credit to Matt LaFleur, who I thought, coached a good game in terms of calling plays to attack the Vikings. Jordan Love certainly made some good throws, but I think on the balance, if you take the good throws with the bad throws, it ends up being a bad game, because just because you make some good throws does not mitigate all of the bad plays that you also made that led to 3 interceptions and honestly a few more plays that probably should have been interceptions. I haven't talked at all about the Packers' run game. One thing I thought was interesting is that they had a pretty high yards per attempt. They got 4.5 yards per attempt, and they had a number of pretty decent plays in the run game, but they had a terrible success rate. So RBSDM.com also does success rate. It's based off of EPA per play. The Packers were only a 27% success rate on the ground. 30%, on the season, 33, 35% is bottom of the NFL, right? So for a single game sample, it's not as great, but it's not as telling. But this is, as a single game sample, was worse than the average of the worst rushing offense overall, because the Vikings were consistently able to get penetration in the backfield. I think, or just push offensive linemen in the backfield. I thought Jonathan Bullard had a great game. I thought Patrick Jones made a couple nice plays. I thought Harrison Phillips was outstanding as usual in run defense. And I think the plays where Blake Cashman had a couple of really nice plays where he was running down from the backside. He had a couple of blemishes too where he ended up getting swallowed up by blockers, but that's what's going to happen for him, right? I thought the successful plays for the Packers were against 2 deep safeties from the Vikings, which is something where the Vikings were kind of just giving up because Harrison Smith and Cam Bynum in those cases were dropping back multiple yards into coverage as opposed to coming up against the run, right? So they really weren't keen on the run at all, and they weren't worried about it in those scenarios as a defense, is what that's telling me. So they don't really care that the Packers got 12 yards on them. I mean, I'm sure they are not thrilled with that, but like they're not, beating themselves up too much over it. So really thought positive things about the run defense, despite maybe a little bit of a high yards per attempt total. So that pretty much wraps up the Vikings-Packers game. I do think the Vikings outperformed the Packers on both sides of the ball. I'm not too concerned about the Packers' comeback towards the end of the game. I think a lot of it was due to, I don't want to say prevent defense. I saw that narrative out there a little bit. I did think the Vikings were playing a little bit softer in the zone. They were playing a lot more quarters than what they typically had, especially in the second half. And because they were playing quarters behind the blitz, it ended up being a softer. I think they were playing a little bit deeper than they probably regularly would have. And I would eliminate the final drive by the Packers entirely, because once the Packers ran the ball on first down, it was like 2:14 left, right? Once the Packers run the ball on first down and the ball ends in play, the next play is going to be the 2-minute warning. So once the 2-minute warning goes off, all you need to do is recover the onside kick and you win the football game. And it's really hard to not recover an onside kick in today's NFL. So I don't really count that drive as anything meaningful for the Packers or the Vikings defense. So with all that being said, I'm going to flip it over to talking a little bit about the Vikings versus the Jets. Obviously, this is the London game, so it'll be 9:30 a.m. where I am, probably 8:30 for Central Time for most people listening to this. And, the middle of the afternoon or early afternoon, I guess, is probably like 2 o'clock for 2:30 for, people in England. But obviously London games are always a little bit weird. You got to get your sleep schedule right for the football team. The Vikings did a great job of it, 2 years ago when they played the Saints in London. Obviously, that was the 13-4 year. They really seemed to figure it out, and they didn't even have a bye week the week after in that game. So, whatever their sports science department or whatever really figured it out. So I trust whatever the Vikings do to prepare for the London game. But it is an added question. Those games tend to be a little bit sloppier than what we typically see. So it might be a bit of a slop fest. On the defensive side of the ball first, I think that's where, kind of the most important keys are. The biggest question for me is whether or not Aaron Rodgers is finally going to be the one to dissect the Vikings coverages, right? You have all these great offenses the Vikings have faced in the past couple weeks, right? Like Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan, completely confounded by the Vikings offense. Well, Brock Purdy was, obviously, by the Vikings defense. That's what he told Brian Flores after the game. CJ Stroud, awesome quarterback. I thought he played, I haven't really gone back, but I thought he was doing as much as he could. Completely stymied by the Vikings offense, 7 points for the Texans, right? Jordan Love and the Packers, 0 points until the Vikings muff a punt on the 3-yard line, go down 28-0, get a bunch of meaningless garbage time points in yardage, completely destroyed by the Vikings defense, I would say. Can Aaron Rodgers be the one to kind of figure it out and dissect the coverage? As, somebody who's got a ton of experience, I do think he's got an okay chance of it, but I think the thing is, Rodgers has to figure out what's going on for the Vikings defense. The offensive line for the Jets, which has injuries already, Morgan Moses is injured. They're starting a rookie who, granted, I liked a lot, the left tackle out of Penn State. But, they have to protect against the Vikings pass rush, which has been excellent this year. And the receivers have to actually be in position to make the plays. And I don't think anybody in the Jets receiver room is good except for Garrett Wilson. So really, you need to stop Garrett Wilson to me, and that's kind of the key on the offensive side of the ball. The Vikings have shown the propensity to use one double coverage so far this year. Just real quick, one double just means you're double teaming a specific receiver. So you'd say for Justin Jefferson, 1 double 18, right? The Vikings ran 1 double on a few reps against Malik Neighbors in the Giants game because they didn't really see any other threats on that offense. I have a feeling that might be something that they do in this Jets game as well, because I don't really see any other passing threats on this offense besides Garrett Wilson. Obviously, the Packers offense hasn't been great the past couple weeks against both the Titans and the Broncos. They just played a disastrous game. I didn't really watch any of that game, but obviously when you lose to a quarterback who throws for 60 total yards in the game, it's probably not a good one. So I don't even really know where the Jets offense is at, but it doesn't seem like it's in a great spot. So that makes the other key to the game, and this is all cliche nonsense. I mean, maybe you don't need me to tell you this, but it's to stop the run. Breece Hall is a very good back. I think the Vikings easily have the horses, however, to stop that running game. I talked about how well I thought they did against the Packers. I think they've generally been a really good run defense team so far this year. It wasn't perfect, obviously, against the 49ers in particular and Jordan Mason, but they kind of won the blows, and Nathaniel Hackett isn't nearly as good of a run game designer, and whoever they have on the offensive line coach isn't nearly as good of a run game designer as the Kyle Shanahan 49ers. So Breece Hall, really good player. Got to make sure they tackle him. The Vikings had a little bit of tackle troubles, I would say, against the Packers, so maybe they need to clean that up, but overall, I think it'll work. The other thing, I guess I would say, is a slight concern with playing Rodgers specifically is the hard count that Rodgers is able to use, right? Rodgers is great at getting free plays off of hard counts, off of players jumping off sides. The Vikings are a very aggressive defense, and they blitz a ton, which means that I think they are going to be a little bit susceptible to the hard counts. We have seen them jump off sides a couple times so far this season on the defensive side of the ball. It hasn't been a major issue, but it's something to be wary of, and if the, Jets get a gash or two on 3 plays, that could be a difference in the game. So if we flip it over to the offensive side of the ball, I think, the marquee matchup for most people who are going to tune into this game is Justin Jefferson versus Sauce Gardner, right? It's an open question on what the Jets want to do with Justin Jefferson. I personally do not recommend guarding Justin Jefferson one-on-one, although I would welcome it, obviously, from the Vikings perspective, because the last time the Jets and Vikings played was Sauce's rookie year. Sauce did travel with Jefferson quite a bit, or at least match up with Jefferson one-on-one quite a bit, and I thought Jefferson got the better of him. He didn't have his best game in terms of yardage production. I think he got like 6 catches for 90 yards or something like that. But there were like 3 or 4 plays where Sauce got flagged or should have gotten flagged for holding because he was not able to keep up with Justin Jefferson just in terms of his route breaks and that sort of thing. So I don't think that's really changed. I mean, Justin Jefferson is still the best receiver in the NFL. So I have full confidence in his ability to get open against anybody. So, I'm interested to see if the Vikings put Sauce on JJ or if they need to do more in terms of like pressing him and putting a safety over top like most opponents do. If that latter part is the case, I think it's a day for the other receivers versus what's still a very good secondary. DJ Reed, I think, is a really good player. They have a couple safeties who I think are playing pretty well in Tony Adams and Chuck Clark, who, was formerly with the Ravens. So it's tough to throw against this Jets team. And they've gone up against bad teams so far, right? They've gone up against the Patriots. They've gone up against the Titans. They've gone up against the Broncos. And they got demolished by the 49ers. So they haven't had the strongest level of competition, but outside of the 49ers game, they're playing pretty well. Now, they were so bad in the 49ers game that they were still like 16th in defensive DVOA or something like that, despite the amount of talent that they have. But, it's not like they're a pushover of a defense, I would say. I believe C.J. Mosley is hurt and probably is going to be out for this game, but they're pretty much full strength otherwise. One of the things that the Vikings, I think, can probably do in this game to be honest, so the only Jets game I've actually kind of watched was the Jets 49ers game, and the Jets did a terrible job of defending the run in the 49ers game. They might have switched up the front in recent games, but it looks like both the both the Patriots and the Broncos were able to run pretty successfully on them, so I'm not sure that they have, where they were using double three techniques and two wide nines, and the 49ers were just running the ball all day on that. That's a great recipe for duo from the Vikings. So if they're getting those fronts from the Jets, I expect a ton of duo with Aaron Jones, and for Aaron Jones to have a really successful day. If you're able to do that and get them out of those packages, you really help yourself in slowing down the pass rush. I guess Will McDonald, who was a couple years ago first round pick, has 5 sacks on the season. I don't know if he's any good. I haven't watched him at all, but that's obviously something to watch out for when somebody puts out that production. You could also say that about Pat Jones, so I'm not very scared of him. But the person I am scared of is Quinnen Williams. Right, the Vikings haven't really been hurt too much by interior pass rush since Dexter Lawrence in week 1, but Quinnen Williams is absolutely somebody who can do that to you, right? He's one of the best interior pass rushers in the NFL, probably a top 5 interior defensive lineman to me in the NFL, and somebody who can absolutely wreck a game against, a weaker interior pass protector like Ed Ingram or Garrett Bradbury. I just praised the offensive line for the pass protection earlier, so I'm really hoping that can stand up. But I'm hoping that, we don't end up in a situation where my praise kind of goes to the wayside and Quinnen Williams wrecks the game in the interior. Sam Darnold can't get anything done going in the passing game because the coverage is good enough, and the Jets are kind of just able to shut down the Vikings and turn it into a muddy, awful, disgusting London game. Those are kind of the keys. It's kind of like when I summarize it all, I kind of feel like, just play better than the Jets. But I think there's a couple insights in there. I'm not worried about Justin Jefferson against Sauce Gardner. I think that duo specifically against the fronts the Jets were presenting in the 49ers game is a really good choice. And I think the interior pass protection really needs to hold up really well in this game against Quinnen Williams. I'm not worried about, frankly, anybody against Christian Darrisaw and Garrett Bradbury. Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill on the edge rusher. Like, the Jets have a plethora of edge rushers, but our tackles are too good for me to really be worried about anything else. And then on the flip side of the ball, you got to make sure that Aaron Rodgers isn't able to pull you offside and kind of tear you apart with efficient passing all day. So that's kind of that on Vikings-Jets. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. You can catch me, Matt Freese, at Fries Football on Twitter. You can catch my co-host, Nick Olson, at Nick Olson NFL. We are at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. We're available on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Also on YouTube, obviously just search Kindred Skulls. And Skull Vikings.